Okay, let's get right into it. As we head into 2026, the US housing market is, well, it's in this weird state of suspense. It feels like everyone is just holding their breath. So in this explainer, we're going to break down this whole complex situation, try to figure out who's really got the upper hand, and see where things might be going.
The best way to picture the market right now is like a really tense standoff. You've got buyers on one side, kind of hoping for a big break, and on the other side, sellers who are really clinging to those high prices from the last few years. So the million-dollar question is, who's going to blink first?
To really get where we are now, we have to rewind the clock back to 2025. And to put it lightly, it was a tough year for pretty much anyone trying to buy or sell a house. It was a year defined by some pretty big shifts and, frankly, some really difficult choices.
So here's how it all played out. After this really sharp drop in the third quarter, mortgage rates just stopped. They just hovered, settling into this stubborn little range of 6.2 to 6.4%. And that, of course, kept a lot of buyers on the sidelines. Then, right at the end of the year, we finally saw home prices start to soften up a tiny bit, but really not by much.
With prices so high and rates just refusing to budge, you've got to wonder, who on earth was actually signing those closing papers? Well, it turns out the buyers who were still in the game weren't just window shopping.
The people who were making moves were what we could call the have-to buyers. We're talking about folks dealing with huge life events. A new job in a different city, a new baby on the way, or maybe downsizing for retirement. For these people, buying a house wasn't really a choice. It was a necessity.
Okay, now this is where it gets really interesting, how the whole perception of the market changed. Because when we got to the last quarter of the year, the official label for the market shifted, and it created this kind of contradiction.
And this shows it perfectly. In Q3, agents were pretty much all calling it a buyer's market. But fast forward to Q4, and that changed to a balanced market. Why? Well, it's likely because people started to lose confidence in the economy as we saw more job losses.
And that is the key question, isn't it? If the market is supposedly balanced, why did it feel like everything was completely stuck in the mud? The answer is, mortgage rates weren't the only thing hitting the brakes.
This quote from Detroit agent Heather Dell really nails it. She's saying the slowdown wasn't really about interest rates, it was much more about these other intrinsic factors. So what does she mean by that?
She means the total cost of living. It's everything else. Buyers weren't just staring at a mortgage payment. They were looking at homeowners insurance that was going through the roof, higher bills for their cars, for healthcare, and even their utility bills were climbing. These were the real deal breakers agents kept hearing about.
All that financial pressure created this massive psychological divide in the market. I'm talking a fundamental mismatch in what buyers and sellers were even thinking.
An agent from Charleston, John Fragola, put it perfectly. He said buyers are thinking it's 2008 all over again, expecting a crash, looking for huge discounts. Meanwhile, sellers, their heads are still stuck in the 2021 boom, expecting bidding wars. And as he says, those are just diametrically opposed mindsets.
So what you've got is two totally different realities colliding head-on. Buyers feel like they finally have some power, and they're looking for a bargain. Sellers, on the other hand, are anchored to those peak prices from a few years ago and think they're still in charge. This is the friction, right here, that made the market just grind to a halt.
But, a standoff like this can't go on forever. Something's got to give. And as 2025 moved along, we started to see the first few cracks appear, as the market's new reality started to chip away at sellers' resolve and really force them to adapt. And the proof is right here in the numbers. A staggering 92% of agents said that at least one of their sellers had to cut their asking price in the fourth quarter. Just think about that. And it goes deeper. Nearly half of those agents said the majority of their sellers were cutting prices. The dam was definitely starting to break. So we saw this really clear pattern start to emerge. Sellers would start off holding firm on their price, still in that 2021 mentality. But then weeks would turn into months, their listing would just sit there getting stale, and reality would sink in. Eventually, they had to get comfortable with offering concessions just to get a deal done. Of course, not every seller was ready to play ball. Some chose a totally different strategy, pulling their home off the market completely, figuring they'd just wait out the winter and hope for a better spring.
So, with all that in the rearview mirror, what's the new year looking like? Well, despite all the headaches of late 2025, there's been this really surprising and pretty significant shift in how people are feeling as we look ahead.
Just look at this number. 77% of agents are expecting 2026 to be a better year for housing than last year. That is a huge wave of optimism coming from the people who are right there on the front lines.
So what's happening is the whole emotional vibe of the market has changed. That deep anxiety that really defined most of 2025 has started to fade, and in its place is this feeling of cautious optimism. People aren't expecting a boom, but that feeling of total uncertainty is starting to go away. And part of that optimism is coming from all this pent-up demand. As one agent put it, a lot of buyers, especially the first-timers, have just gotten tired of waiting. They've had enough. They're getting used to this new normal, and they're just ready to make a move.
Which brings us right back to our standoff. You have sellers slowly coming to terms with reality, and you have buyers who are just getting impatient. It really seems like that great expectation gap might finally be closing. So the big question for 2026 is this. Is this uneasy truce about to turn into some real momentum?